Cannabinoids, plants, and people, plant phytocannabinoids in the mammalian endocannabinoid system by Rory Turnbull. And just, again, to talk about brilliant people, if you get a chance to just sit and talk to this guy about anything related to plants or like minerals or anything to do with growing plants, he's I would say genius. But we're lucky to have you here, and I can't wait to hear your talk. So, love you.
So this talk is about cannabinoids. I'm sure most people are familiar with cannabis. Some people are familiar with phytocannabinoids. But who here is familiar with endocannabinoids, or the endocannabinoid system? So basically, cannabinoids have... What was that? Oh, my name is Rory Turnbull. So basically, cannabinoids are a series of molecules that have actually been around much longer than cannabis has. They first, believe the first known creature to have cannabinoids were sea squirts, these amphibious creatures that were around about 150, 200 million years ago. What the endocannabinoid system is basically an extension of the nervous system in mammalian animals. And in your nervous system, you have neurotransmitters that send all types of signals throughout the body. But the thing with neurotransmitters is they only travel one direction. And so if you're familiar with the pictures of the synapses in the brain, there's the little gap with you see the sparks shooting through. Those travel in a single direction. And your cannabinoid and receptors and the cannabinoid receptors are on the postsynaptic side, whereas the receptors on the presynaptic side, the producers are on the postsynaptic side, which means that your cannabinoids are basically modulators of your entire nervous system. So as you have, like epilepsy is when things are firing too much. And so normally the dimmer switch of the body to regulate and modulate those things is actually your endocannabinoid system. Even if you've never consumed cannabis, your body is completely regulated from cradle to grave by cannabinoids. And they're synthesized from essential fatty acids, which are one of the most important things in people's diets, but also one of the most deficient things in people's diets, especially in the Western world. But they relate to things like memory, stress, appetite, pain relief, and a whole bunch of different functions throughout the body. And so as people are starting to realize the psychological impacts of, the physiological, psychological impacts of the brain, people's brain health is obviously from just how stressful the world is and a lot of the kind of psychological toxicity. There's actual chemical toxicity that's, affecting people's brains, the way people think and the way people are able to process thoughts. And a lot of that actually comes down to the physical integrity of the brain, which is very much regulated by these cannabinoids and largely by your essential fatty acid intake. And so, there's the CB1 receptors and then the CB2 receptors. And people are very familiar with these because these are the receptors that THC and CBD interact with, and with all the medical and recreational cannabis stuff going on, there's a lot more focus on these. But just a list of like this, the CB1 receptors are actually the most abundant G protein coupled receptor in the body, which is pretty amazing. I mean, it's a little bit of word soup there, but basically it's this network of proteins that regulate your body is one of the most pervasive ones throughout your entire body. And they're in everywhere from your spinal cord to your brain, to your gut, your pancreas, your liver, your heart, your GI tract, your skin. And then in the CB2 receptor, those are more of an immunomodulatory function that regulate your spleen, your tonsils, immune cells, bone marrow, the thymus gland, and also the skin again, which is a very important portion of the immune system. And so as far as pain goes, a lot of people are familiar with the pain regulation of cannabinoids, but they're pretty amazing in the sense that you have what are called your TRP receptors. There's TRP V1, V4, V3, M8, and A1. And basically these are the receptors in your skin that interact with like capsaicin or menthol. Like if you put on, Bengay or something like that and you get that cooling, tingling sensation, that's actually these particular receptors in your skin. And again, whether or not you've ever consumed cannabis or not, these cannabinoid receptors that interact with these other receptors in the body and regulate pain. So cannabis, or even just supplementing with, there's quite a number of plants that have cannabinoids besides cannabis. Like echinacea is one. Was it the? I had a list of them, but again, I'm a little underprepared here. But basically, making sure you have a proper intake of essential fatty acids is key to making sure the health of these receptors work. And let's see here. So the amazing thing with cannabinoids is they interact with pain not just on a neurological level in the sense of the way that your body actually communicates with your pain receptors, but they actually interact directly with the pain receptors locally to ensure that they're functioning properly. So if you know people that deal with pain from all type, pretty much any type of pain throughout the body, the cannabinoid system is a very important place to work through and work with. They're also very important with the eicosanoids, the prostaglandins, the leukotrienes, which are basically inflammatory mediators. And when you have, let me see here. Basically the body's network for managing inflammation and anti-inflammatory responses is also heavily regulated by these series of pathways that are very closely tied to the endocannabinoid system. And many diseases and illnesses can be traced back to inflammation and inflammatory responses. And like with this whole thing going on, a lot of the cytokine storm that people are experiencing, it's a relatively simple physiological process to work with, but the tools that pharmaceutical companies use often don't really interact with these systems too well. That's kind of the beauty of plant medicine, is they have a multitude of compounds that work with all types of different functions and interactions. And when you use a single compound, you'll get often a single targeted response, but there'll be a chain reaction of side effects that come from the single molecular compound, which is very foreign to the human body and most biological systems in general. And so you have, here we go, yeah, so cannabimimetics, echinacea, black pepper, kava, and electric daisy are 3 or 4 plants that also very heavily interact with the CB1 and CB2 receptor systems. Let's see. And so let's see here. There we go. All right. All right. So again, you have endocannabinoids, which are cannabinoids that your body synthesizes. You have anandamide. You have the C? Gosh, sorry, I just put this talk together a couple years ago. I haven't dug it up since. Let's see here. Well, so you've got endogenous cannabinoids, again, which if you've never consumed cannabis, your body synthesizes them if it has proper essential fatty acid ratios like omega-3 and omega-6. But there's also the phytocannabinoids, which are in a few different plants, but cannabis by far is the richest source of phytocannabinoids. So you've got THC and CBD, which most people are familiar with, but there's actually about 120 other cannabinoids, which were still the combinations therein of, along with not just the combinations of cannabinoids, but other compounds within the cannabis plant, like the terpenes and flavanols and all types of different essential oils within the plant interact with the cannabinoids to facilitate where they go throughout the body, how they interact with the body. And for example, like CBN is an anti-epileptic. It helps with eye pressure and pain relief and sleep and anxiety. And then you've got CBC, which is it's not active at the CB1 or CB2 receptors, but it activates with the TRP1 the receptors in the skin that interact with capsaicin and menthol and have more of the skin-based pain relief. And then you've got CBG, which is a potent anti-inflammatory, but it's also a neurogenerative. So it actually stimulates brain cell production and regrowth. And there's a lot of work in Israel being done with people with pretty severe brain damage and having really remarkable effects with CBG. Then you've got THCV, which is a osteogenerative. It actually helps bone growth and regrowing bones. It's also anti-inflammatory. It's an analgesic, means a pain reliever. And the amazing thing is that, so when you consume raw cannabis, like if you juice the leaves or just eat the leaves raw, any cannabinoid in the plant will be in the acid form, meaning that so you have THC, which is the psychoactive cannabinoid, in cannabis raw before it's heated. That's the whole point of heating it, whether through smoking or vaping or baking. The THC, it's a fancy word, decarboxylates, which means that acid attached to the THC breaks off. So THC is not psychoactive in the THCA form, which is the form that's in the plant. But the amazing thing about THCA is it's actually about, from what I've read, about 400 times more anti-inflammatory than THC. So a lot of people, there's been a kind of a misnomer in the medical cannabis movement in the sense that a lot of people who were just intending to use it recreationally use the medical system to push that forward, which I think there's nothing wrong with that. Just people trying to work their way, navigate through prohibition. But a lot of the lingo has come around that people will say for cannabis to be medically active, you need to heat it up. They say, THC, you have to make it medicinally active, you have to heat it up and turn it from THCA into THC, which is kind of a misnomer because you're making it psychoactive at that point, which does have all types of medical benefits even beyond the psychoactivity. But a lot of what people could be seeking cannabis for from a medical standpoint could be the anti-inflammatory response. And a lot of those people may be very sensitive to THC and the psychoactivity. And so, it's very powerful information, I believe, for people to know that consuming raw cannabis, whether juiced or in a tincture or some form that's not heated up, there's basically no psychoactivity, but you still have huge medical benefits from all the different cannabinoids. And so, let's see here. Another pretty remarkable thing about the cannabis plant is that the seeds are actually extremely rich source of omega-3 and omega-6 essential fatty acids. So just how I was saying, whether or not you ever consume phytocannabinoids, your body's own endocannabinoid system is heavily dependent on essential fatty acids for synthesizing your body's own endocannabinoids. And in that sense, cannabis seeds are an amazing source of those essential fatty acids for consuming. Also, flaxseed oil, pretty much most seed oils are going to be rich in these omega oils. It's just going to be a different ratio of the 3 to 6, which is going to give you different anti-inflammatory responses. And let's see here. The seeds are, since I'm on the point of the seeds are really amazing. They're probably one of the most nutrient-dense foods known. They're about 30% protein, 30% fat, and 20% really high quality carbohydrates. But they're also about 10% minerals. really, really rich in copper, phosphorus, zinc, magnesium, manganese, even the vitamin B1 and B3. But the really amazing thing about cannabis seeds or hemp seeds is that they have a protein in them called edestin protein, which has been listed by, they don't have much merit anymore, but the WHO has listed them as the most bioavailable protein known. And so, like the word edestin comes from the Greek word for edible, basically. And so, you have it's about 65% edestin and 35% albumin, which is a really, really, really bioavailable protein. But the amazing thing about these edestin proteins is that they're a globular protein, because you have what are called structural proteins, which make, your teeth and your hair and your skin and muscles and actually make the structure of your body. But then you also have globular proteins, which are used to synthesize hormones and neurotransmitters and a lot of the kind of the really important bits and pieces the operating system, not just the hardware. And so a lot of the deficiency people have within their body's own synthesis of these things really comes back to high quality protein as well as high quality fat, which the seeds are an amazing source of. And let's see here. So, like I said, apologize, I'm a little scattered. Let's see here. So, basically, the endocannabinoid system is an evolutionary advancement or extension of the nervous system and nerve cells. Throughout the entire body, there's combinations of endocannabinoids as well as endocannabinoid receptors. The brain is primarily where these types of receptors reside, but as well as in the brainstem and a little bit in the periphery system. And then while the CB2 receptors are almost found entirely in immune cells and immune system, they're largely in the gut and throughout various organs. There's also a connection, let's see here. Shoot, see, I went over that. Let's see here. So the leukotrienes and the prostaglandins, which I mentioned before, they're the body's main agents of constriction as well as coagulation. So, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, so blood flow, clotting, healing from cuts and wounds and things of that nature. These are pathways that are heavily involved in these different molecular pathways there. Let's see here. Sorry, these notes are a little scattered. Let's see here. I think that's kind of pretty much the gist of it. Like I said, it's really, a lot of this is just kind of technical, just listing, like the spinal cord going into, the connection that the CB1 receptor has in there, which has to do with cascading pain response, central sensitization, which is like chronic pain, your transmission of pain signaling, let's see here. So in your gut, you have your enteric nervous system, which modulates the propulsion of digestion throughout the body as well as excretion. As far as the pancreas goes, it has a lot to do with insulin release and storage, which has a lot to do with the blood sugar and hypoglycemia and a lot of the diabetic kind of problems facing the nation and the world. Stimulates glucogen release, which raises blood glucose, B cell function, which is like your white blood cells. As far as the liver goes, it regulates lipid storage, insulin sensitivity, glucose uptake, glucose disposal. Let's see here. I don't want to bore you guys with all that, but yeah, basically just your entire body's nervous system is heavily regulated by cannabinoids. Whether or not you've ever consumed cannabis or not, it's also just one of the reasons why if you look at cannabis as a medical thing, you see just this long list of things that it can work with, and it almost seems, crazy, because it's just people say, how can it interact with all these different things? And it's because your body's own systems rely heavily on these very same molecules, which basically the plant is mimicking. And so, kind of takeaway from all this is that, cannabis is a very powerful medicine. There's lots of different strains which all have varying levels of cannabinoids, and so it's kind of as different as an opioid would be from an amphetamine in that sense of so if you're seeking cannabis for a particular medical ailment, make sure that to do some research into the strain, or for what evidence there is for what it is you're trying to treat, because one strain could be a completely different medicine than another, and even within that, even if you're opposed to taking cannabis, or haven't found a strain you like I said, just making sure you're getting adequate essential fatty acid intake through omega-3 and 6 is very important to making sure that your own endocannabinoid system is functioning properly. And good couple resources. William Courtney is a really amazing doctor based out of Mendocino, and he does a lot of work with juicing, like the raw, kind of like wheatgrass juicing, and of the leaves as well as the flowers. Robert Melamede, or Bob Melamede, is a really brilliant doctor based out of Colorado Springs University, and he's done a lot of work on the endocannabinoid system and the body's own endogenous cannabinoids. Let's see, Treating Yourself is a journal that's public, kind of like an independently published medical journal that focuses specifically on cannabis. And I think that's pretty much it.
I got like 1,000 questions, so I'm
Yeah.
not going to ask 1,000 questions, but I have a couple. Yeah, I'm going to talk about something afterwards. So it's awesome that you talked about this, because it really fits in with something that came up for me that I'm going to share afterwards. But so my first question, are they like isolating all those, like you're saying, like certain ones are better for like inflammation, et cetera, et cetera? I know obviously like CBD's being isolated and stuff, but are those all being like isolated and like offered, available to people for specific things, like without having or needing to like take in a whole strain of a plant or whatever, but that they could just...
Some are, but like I said, they're really still discovering them. I used to look at it, there's 85 total cannabinoids, now it's up to 120, and so they just keep adding more and more and more, and as we breed more and more
chakras
strains
and stuff, like we just...
Right. But so the more popular ones like THC, THCV, CBG, CBN, the big kind of main ones that people hear about, those are being isolated. But the thing with, like I said, what makes plant medicine generally so special is that it's not just an isolate. You can have a concentrate, which maybe, even beyond the plant concentrating particular cannabinoids, you can make a concentrate of that plant. But as soon as you isolate one compound out of it, it's gonna react totally differently.
Actually, my second question was that, like, I've always heard that, like, yes, there's benefits to CBD, but like basically when you eliminate or you like start isolating things, that you lose out on a whole lot of different healing properties that don't exist unless they're combined, just like with a lot of other plants.
Exactly, and because it's not just the cannabinoids, but there's any plant, there's thousands of molecules, and so that's kind of one of the big, even like vitamin C, taking isolated ascorbic acid is very different in your body compared to eating a plant that's rich in ascorbic acid, because there's, hundreds, if not thousands, of different chemicals that are attributing to that effect that plant's giving you. And so, a lot of the side effects from pharmaceuticals aren't necessarily just from the drug itself, but just the fact that it's just this one molecule that's working with one specific pathway in the body. And normally, say if they isolate, say if I think it's about 85% of pharmaceuticals are isolated from nature, but if you take a plant that's rich in one particular compound, it still has all these other compounds that are going to interact with it, and so those normally will mitigate or completely eliminate the side effects that the one single compound would give you. And so beyond just the combination of different cannabinoids, there's the terpenes, there's even just the chlorophyll and the fat, the protein, and I was just recently listening to an analytical chemist who tests food quality, and he was saying when they put an apple in a machine, there's about, say 3,000 to 5,000 different molecules in just that one apple. But the amazing thing is that probably he said that's only about 40% of what we've only mapped 40% of them. There's still 6,000 other molecules in that apple that we don't even have cataloged or known. And so knowing all the variables in there is something we're just scratching the surface of.
Well, I know from somebody who I've grown different strains, and just like each plant that you're talking about has different healing properties. Every single strain has completely different personality and traits, and the way that it grows and the way it changes when it goes to flower, and they all smell different, and they're different stickiness, and they taste different when you smoke them and everything. Every single one has its own personality. And one of the things I think is brilliant about the plant is Michael Pollan, Botany of Desire, talks about how plants all just want to propagate life. That's all they exist for, is to propagate life, and that the most brilliant plants have found ways to be wanted by people, because when people want a plant, we propagate it and grow it everywhere. And this particular plant has had the imagination of a lot of brilliant minds for a long time. And the amount of things that people know about this plant, I'd guarantee there's no other plant that people know as much about specifically, like ins and outs and every layer of it. And you meet so many people that are just obsessed from childhood with wanting to know everything about this plant and are connected with it on some. And then you find out that because you're born with stuff inside you that connects with that plant.
Right. Breast milk is loaded in cannabinoids. It's one of the
wonder babies get so
right.
Right. All right. Does anybody else have a question before my last question? Did they want to ask him? I don't want to take all the questions. We do. I sell lighters at concerts. Anybody else have any? Yes.
Yeah. The flower gets a little trickier because of the stickiness, but there are generally it's the leaves. But I know a good amount of people that juice the whole plant, and yeah.
Do you know if there's a version of something like Rick Simpson oil that doesn't involve heat to extract the?
I would say just the raw juice. The work William Courtney's work. He's done a lot. He's pretty much that's his whole thing is just juicing the entire plant, and gives that to a lot of. It's because it's really concentrated. Just a shot glass is really potent. Not psychoactively, but just medically.
And this isn't a weed commercial or anything, by the way, if you're not into that, we understand. But to me, it's funny because I feel like cannabis is actually more valuable than money, because you can eat it and it's medicine, and you can build things with it, and you can trade it to other people that want it. What you can't do is, you can trade money for stuff, but you can't eat it, and it's not medicine.
Oh, definitely. And it's ecologically, it's probably one of the most, in terms of permaculture, the cannabis embodies the spirit of permaculture probably more than any other plant I could think of, just because, you could base an entire civilization off of it, literally. The first Model T Ford, the body was made out of a hemp composite. It's stronger than steel. Yeah, you can fuel it with hemp. You can lubricate, oil, the fuel, the upholstery, even the tires.
All we need.
You can make houses out of it, composite beams, paint it, lacquer it, put carpet in it. Anything. And coming back to the ecological thing, there's the name of the game with restoring ecosystems and restoring soil is capturing carbon and putting carbon back in the soil and getting as much biomass as you can. And cannabis is one of the most carbon efficient plants known. It packs carbon so densely, which is why there's now hemp graphene batteries that they're looking at making, because it's so dense in carbon. And so in terms of pulling excess carbon,
Isaac needs to get involved in that.
Right.
That makes sense to me. Hey kids, real quick, after Alfred's talk about the stars in the sky. Hey kids, can you hear me back there? Kids, can you hear me? Go start picking out your costumes in there, because your costume parade is going to start after Alfred talks about the stars in the skies. There's Star Child Parade, so go start picking out your costumes. Yeah, whenever he's done, that's when it'll be. So here's my last question. It leads into what I'm going to talk about a little bit. And he brought up Rick Simpson oil, but do you know anything about that protocol, or are you familiar with it at all? Is there anything you could share about that?
Yeah, so the Rick Simpson oil it's very concentrated, but the key thing is that it's the whole plant. a lot of the producers of it, they'll even use the roots of the plant, and so it's not just the flowers, and they're not trying to just get as much THC as they can. They're trying to get as much cannabinoids as they can, concentrated. And also from my research, I think the alcohol as the solvent is very key, because when you use glycerin or butane, like
Well,
a lot
I
of
just
the-
ordered a $150 gallon of food grade ethanol, organic
Perfect.
food grade ethanol.
Perfect.
Is that good? Okay, good.
Because you're basically making a salt. The alcohol in there is combining with it, and while you evaporate off a lot of what's left over is kind of a new formed compound. And from my research, a lot of what makes the alcohol extract so special is that the compounds that are liberated through the alcohol are, because you could do the same thing using the butane is really popular, and a lot of the people that smoke it recreationally. But if you do that same extraction process using a different solvent, it doesn't have the same medical benefits. Exactly. So,
Awesome. Guys, I don't know. Anybody else has any more questions? I'm so grateful that you're here to share
I think I
that.
missed. Did you
Is there
have
one more? Sam, did you have one?
I just was curious if you did. So you're talking basically about and he says about how either light or electromagnetism interacts with
I'm so glad you asked that too, because I need to talk to you about something after this.
or anything, like in terms of regulating it, or because I find that the chemical model for regulation. The chemical model explains how things connect. This causes that. But in terms of how overall, I tend to think that a lot of it's actually regulated by something like
definitely? I mean, because
faster than a chemical reaction.
on a more metaphysical standpoint, chemistry is basically just tone. It's essentially it's a resonant frequency, and even getting into more the spirit medicine and plant medicine avenue, that each molecule is basically is an entity or a spiritual being that is resonating at a particular frequency, and they marry with other entities that are resonating at kind of like how tones go together and sound goes together. That's essentially what chemistry is. And so very much so, you could really essentially mimic any one of these compounds just using radionics or homeopathy, and essentially embody just the energy or the pattern or signature of the molecule rather than the physical being itself. But definitely the light, they're essentially made from sunlight. Cannabis is essentially taking sunlight and combining it with other
All the
earth
plants
minerals.
and the fruits and vegetables are.
Exactly. And so it's definitely very, very much along those realms too, I believe.
Awesome. So this is going pretty good. If anybody doesn't have anything else, thank you so much, Rory. Rory's staying tonight, so we can talk more about this later because we need to. Thank you so much for sharing with us, man. I appreciate you.